She stands at the edge of something that isn't quite a platform and isn't quite a ruin. Around her, dust, fine and ancient, shifting slightly in silence that doesn't feel like quiet but like pressure. The earth is hanging in the sky like a memory. Too close to forget, too far to reach. She's not moving. One hand rests on her side. The other hovers near her helmet, not touching it. Just hovering, as if afraid that if she adjusts her vision, the world might crack. There's a flag nearby. It doesn't move. Not because there's no wind, but because there's nothing left to respond to. The colors are still visible, just faint enough to suggest time. A single footprint stretches from her toward it and then stops. No others. One motion, then nothing. Like we touched the future and recoiled. It's strange what doesn't happen after victory. We made it here. We stood on another world. We walked. We placed a marker in the dust like a species signing a contract with the cosmos. And then we left. For 50 years, we've circled ourselves like something lost in a maze of mirrors, convinced we'll return, someday, when it's right, when it's safe, when it matters. NNBUT. Maybe the real question isn't, why didn't we return? Maybe the question is, what did we lose when we stopped trying? NNSHE kneels, fingertips brushing the surface. The dust clings, as if remembering skin. There's no sound. No applause, no broadcast, no dream. Just her and the thing we left behind. Not a place, but a decision. A pause that stretched into a philosophy. There's an idea that silence in space is peaceful. But this isn't peace. This is neglect. This is the sound of something abandoned without grieving it. She looks up. Not at Earth, but at the black between everything. The question isn't just why we haven't been back. It's why we've grown comfortable not going anywhere at all. And in that moment, brief, unfilmed, unwitnessed, she does something terrifying. She doesn't speak. She doesn't move. She stays. As if the only thing more radical than going further is refusing to go home. There's a photograph that never leaves my mind. A grainy black and white frame from Apollo 17, the last manned mission to the moon. A man, almost motionless, stands beside a rover, behind him. A shadow curved across dust. He's facing away from the camera, as if drawn towards something outside the frame. The Earth is rising on the horizon, like a memory returning without permission. It's 1972. He doesn't know that no one will return after him. NNSHE saw this photograph once, in a science museum, the kind with planetary domes and dim halls where children forget their learning. She stopped in front of it, not because she understood the context, but because it felt unfinished. Something about the stance. The absence of motion. It didn't look like an arrival. It looked like someone realizing there's nothing else to do. NNWE touched the moon with analog fingers. Slide rules. Burned circuits. Human guesswork and manual override. And when we got there, it was real. And realness has weight. Not symbolic, not mythic. Literal dust. Real silence. A surface that didn't respond. And maybe that was the problem. The moon didn't give anything back. NNWE went because we were afraid of losing, not because we were ready to belong there. Cold War calculus. If we couldn't own the Earth, we'd at least own its mirror. But the moment we planted that flag, the equation dissolved. There was nothing left to prove, and far too much left to feel. That's the fracture no one discusses. The emotional cost of reaching something first. When the race ends, so does the rhythm. And in that pause, in that cultural exhale, something collapsed. Not the technology, not the science, the will. The thing behind the funding. The belief that forward motion is worth paying for, even when it doesn't generate return. NNSHE didn't grow up with rockets. She grew up with reboots, delays, promises of 2024, 2030, 2045. She grew up with renderings instead of missions, headlines instead of launches. She grew up knowing that the moon is close, but closer as fantasy than as plan. And when you grow up like that, your sense of time shifts. Progress becomes rumor. Exploration becomes nostalgia. And distance, even just 384,400 kilometers, begins to feel infinite. NNTHE Moon stopped being a destination. It became a backdrop, a metaphor, a canvas for trailers and timelines, but never flights. And in that slow erasure, something darker set in, the normalization of immobility. Not stillness, but stagnation dressed as caution. Caution dressed as wisdom. It's easy to say we'll go back. Harder to admit we never truly arrived. Because maybe arriving somewhere isn't about landing. It's about staying long enough to listen. NNSHE once asked me, not in words, but in the way she looked out the window during a blackout, what it meant that we never returned. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The room was quiet. The sky was full. But there were no footprints out there, only reflections. NNNWE like to think we're still explorers. That ambition is dormant, not dead. That we're just waiting for the right rocket, the right budget, the right geopolitical arrangement. But what if we're not? What if we stopped chasing the moon because we no longer need it to chase us back? NNWE turned away, not because it was too far, but because it was too silent. Because it didn't give us what we wanted. Not answers, but applause. And now, every image of the moon carries that quiet judgment. Not that we failed to return, but that we no longer care to. NNSHE closes the museum brochure. The lights flicker above her. Outside, a billboard shows a sleek spacecraft gliding over lunar soil. It says, "We're going back." She doesn't smile. She doesn't believe it. Not because she's cynical, but because she understands something most of us try to forget. Going back isn't about propulsion. It's about permission. And we haven't granted it to ourselves in half a century. The distance from Earth to the moon is just under 400,000 kilometers. That's 1.5 seconds of light, or 3 days by Apollo-era velocity. We forget how close it is. We forget that, in cosmic terms, it's barely an arm's reach away. But the real distance isn't measured in kilometers. It's measured in commitment, in heat shields, in oxygen systems, in silence. In 1971, the Saturn V carried 3,000 tons of force at launch. That's the equivalent of lifting 17 Niagara Falls at once. And it only took us to the edge of gravity's reach. The final meters, the moon's surface itself, were crossed by hand. Joystick, muscle memory, human breath trapped inside glass. The closer we got, the more delicate everything became. Force gave way to fragility. NNSHE learned this reading a declassified checklist. Every line an instruction for staying alive. Check suit integrity. Confirm valve close. Activate EVA recorder. It felt like poetry, not because it rhymed, but because the stakes were absolute. Miss one step, and you don't return, not just to Earth. To history.nnwe like to say it was a simpler time, but it wasn't. It was just a time that accepted risk as the cost of wonder. Today, we run simulations of simulations. We test foam for decades. We measure psychological drift in isolation pods. And still, we don't go. Not because we can't, but because we require certainty, and space doesn't offer that. NNTHE, moon never changed. We did. The same physics still applies. The same gravity well. The same escape velocity, 11.2 kilometers per second. But we've built emotional systems that weigh more than any module. Bureaucracy, distraction, noise. Systems designed not for ascent, but for delay. NNSHE once sat in a VR simulation of the Apollo 11 landing. The moment the LEM touches down, an alert appears. Simulation complete. She removed the headset. Around her, a crowd of kids laughed, pressed buttons, reset the mission. None of them stayed to look. None of them asked what happened after the flag. No one remembered that they didn't stay. NNTHE moon is made of silence and contrast. White dust, black shadows. Absolute heat, absolute cold. Every step taken there is still etched in regolith. Because there's no wind to erase them. That's the thing. Nothing natural will remove our presence. Only our absence does that. One fact she didn't know. Every Apollo mission left trash behind. Tools, boots, cameras, even bags of waste. The moon is a museum of half-finished intentions, human fragments sealed in stillness. We talk about sustainability on Earth while leaving debris in the heavens, not out of malice, but neglect, because permanence was never part of the plan. That's the paradox of engineering a dream. Once it's achieved, it's archived. We don't iterate on triumph. We preserve it. But the moon isn't a trophy. It's an unfinished sentence. Imagine a city built from the momentum of a single act. Now imagine that city abandoned because no one wanted to be the second to walk its streets. That's lunar exploration. A beginning mistaken for an ending. NNSHE once watched archival footage of a launch, not for the rocket, but for the people. The technicians. The seamstresses who stitched the suits. The engineers who calculated slingshots by hand. There was a collective belief that the impossible was just detail. That belief was the real engine. Today, we build rockets larger than Saturn V, more efficient, more reusable, and still, we delay. We wait for alignment, for clearance, for strategy. But space doesn't wait. Space just is. And our hesitation doesn't pause its physics. It only postpones our part in it. And a modern Mars mission would require at least 500 days of isolation. A moon base, perhaps just months. But we haven't even started rehearsing with seriousness. We prototype and postpone. We animate and avoid. Somewhere between CGI and committee, we misplace the urgency. NNTHE irony is, we've never had better tools. We've never had more data. We've never been more connected. And yet, we've never been less willing. Not as scientists, but as a civilization. The moon is close. Closer than our history makes it feel. But it's not a question of physics anymore. It's a question of decision. NNSHE once asked what it would take to go back. The list was short. A rocket, a system, a crew. But the truth was longer. It would take a reason. And we haven't had one that held. Not since fear drove us. Not since pride pushed us. Not since grief froze us. There's a quote buried in an early NASA memo. The moon is not the end. It is the threshold. But we treated it like a climax. A punctuation mark. A final line in the story of ascent. And maybe that's the real heartbreak. Not that we stopped, but that we stopped calling it the beginning. She's watching a simulation on her tablet. A glossy animation of a future moon base. Solar panels stretch like wings. Habitats glow faintly under regolith shielding. Rovers glide across powdered plains with smooth, robotic grace. There's even a garden, sealed in glass, sprouting lettuce in lunar gravity. It's beautiful, it's perfect. It doesn't exist. We've gotten good at rendering what we don't build. At designing futures for the screen, not for the soil. The moon has become a stage set for possibility, not a place. The surface we once scarred with boot prints is now an aesthetic in pitch decks, a backdrop for funding rounds, a symbol more than a target. And symbols don't require launches. Just belief maintenance. NNBUT. What if we've passed some invisible line? Not technological, but psychological. What if the real reason we haven't returned is because we've reclassified the moon? Not as a world, but as a monument. A reminder of something we don't want to admit. That we got there and didn't know what to do next. NN, because progress isn't just forward motion, it's forward integration. And we failed to integrate the moon. It didn't become a stepping stone. It became a pause button. SHE walks along a hallway in an aerospace museum. The walls are lined with timelines, arrows pointing into futures that never arrived. One placard reads, Permanent Lunar Presence by 1985. Another says, Mars by 1999. None of it happened. It's not failure, it's drift. A slow retraction of ambition, hidden behind layers of optimism. NNWE thought we'd be further by now, not just physically, but existentially. That we'd be a species with a second horizon. Instead, we recycle the same few dreams in higher resolution. Better fonts. Bigger screens. But still, no second flag. Still, no second footprint. What if the moon is no longer a frontier, but a mirror? Not reflecting stars, but us. Not the US of 1969, full of fire and static. But the us of now, fractured, distracted, cautious. A species more fluent in fear than in propulsion. NNSHE once asked, "What's changed since the Apollo era?" I started listing budgets, politics, priorities. But she interrupted. "No," she said. "What changed inside us?" NNTHAT question lingers longer than any technical breakdown. Because we could go back. We know the math. We have the metal. But maybe the part we lost isn't external. Maybe it's internal architecture, the will to move without applause. In her apartment, the moonlight shines through the window at a precise angle. Every month, same trajectory, same shape, same distance. The moon never stopped showing up. Only we did. There's a term in systems theory: path dependence. It means once a process starts, the easiest thing to do is to keep doing it, even if it no longer serves its purpose. In a way, not returning to the moon became its own form of path dependence. A collective assumption that there's no need or that someone else will do it first. NNTHE longer we wait, the heavier the return becomes. Not in mass, in meaning. The moon waits, and in waiting, it accretes symbolism. To go back now would require confronting everything we've let fade. Our velocity, our unity, our sense of collective awe. NNSHE once imagined what it would feel like to land there now, to step off a modern spacecraft and touch the ground where others once stood. Would it feel like continuation or trespassing? Would we be visitors or descendants? That's the fracture no simulation can fix. We can model habitats, but not longing. We can code flight paths, but not courage. And we can launch, technically. But spiritually, we're still grounded. Because to return isn't just to arrive. It's to reconcile with who we were, with who we said we'd be, and with who we've allowed ourselves to become. NNTHE moon hasn't changed. It's still there, hanging in the sky like a door slightly ajar. But we're the ones standing in the hallway, holding our breath, too afraid to knock. NNSHE closes her tablet. The animation fades. Her reflection stares back. Not from a visor. From glass. NNTHE world outside is bright, loud, full of everything but silence. And somewhere beyond it, just beyond it, is a question we haven't answered in 50 years. What are we waiting for? There's a photograph few have seen, taken by a forgotten lunar orbiter. It shows the moon not from above, but from below. From its own shadow looking back at Earth. Barely a curve of light. You can't see continents, cities, wars. Just a fragile halo. A blur, the only home we've ever known. Caught in a moment of cosmic humility. NNSHE once saw this photo printed on metal at a gallery, tucked between abstractions and noise. It stopped her. Not because of its detail, but because of its indifference. The moon doesn't care about us. It doesn't care who won, who left, who promised to return. It simply reflects, not light, but absence. And that, perhaps, is its greatest threat, that in its stillness, it forces us to confront our stilling. Because returning isn't about exploration. It's about intimacy. The willingness to face what we left behind in ourselves when we left that surface. The moon holds no air, but it holds our echo. And that echo hasn't changed in half a century. It still sounds like disbelief. There's something about bodies in space, the human body, specifically. Designed for Earth's pull, its breath, its friction. On the moon, it becomes an artifact. Fragile. Foreign. Slightly comedic in motion. She once watched slow-motion footage of a lunar jump. The astronaut arcs awkwardly, limbs flailing, dust rising. It's beautiful. And wrong. As if nature is reminding us, you don't belong here. But you tried. NNTHE moon's gravity is 1/6 of Earth's. That means everything weighs less, except decisions. Decisions weigh more. Because there's no friction to disguise them. No atmosphere to blur the line between impulse and intent. What you choose to do on the moon echoes without dilution. NNSHE once ran her fingers over a 3D printed model of the moon's surface. The craters, the scars, none of them are weathered, because nothing erodes there, which means every impact remains, every collision becomes legacy. That's the rule out there. What touches, stays. What breaks, stays broken. And maybe that's why we stayed away. Because the moon doesn't allow us to rewrite. It doesn't allow us to smooth over, to pave, to distract. It holds our first steps like indictments, not of ambition, but of abandonment. In Earth's atmosphere, things fade. Wind carries away footprints, rain cleanses, time softens. But on the moon, history is literal, physical, etched in layers of dust no thicker than memory. You walk once, and the path waits forever. NNSHE once asked, would we still want to go if the moon looked more like Earth? Blue skies, soft soil, movement. I don't think so. I think its silence is the point. Its lifelessness forces confrontation, not with alien terrain, but with human motive. And because to return is to admit we weren't finished. And that's harder than pretending we succeeded. We didn't fail at technology. We failed at continuity, at carrying forward the will that got us there. And the moon, in its absolute stillness, refuses to let that go. There's something deeply human about the need to close loops, to finish stories, to come back, not just physically, but psychologically. The moon is our biggest unfinished loop. We began something there, and we paused it, not with resolution, but with exhaustion. NNSHE sometimes dreams of standing there, not launching, not discovering, just standing, breathing recycled air, feeling nothing beneath but powdered stone, nothing above but black. And within that black, not fear, but permission, to feel small, to feel humbled, to feel that not everything has to lead somewhere. Because maybe the mistake was thinking the moon had to mean more than it did. Maybe just being there was the point, not for domination, not for strategy, but for pause, for presence, for the first moment in human history where we existed off-book, outside myth, outside ritual, just there, between gravity wells, alive. NNSHE once touched a stone said to be lunar, a museum fragment. Cold, lighter than expected. And holding it, she didn't feel awe. She felt remorse, because to touch what we abandoned is to inherit the consequences of forgetting. And maybe that's what makes the moon different from every other place we'll ever aim for. It's not distant, it's deliberate. It's the one place we left not because we couldn't stay, but because we didn't know how to mean it. And NWE can build ships again, land again, broadcast again. But until we learn how to arrive, not physically, but philosophically, every return will feel like a reenactment, not an evolution. NNTHE moon doesn't move away. It's tidally locked. Its face, the same, always, watching us and maybe it's not waiting. Maybe it's just wondering why we are. She walks along the shore just before dawn. The ocean is dark, metallic, unlit. But the moon hangs low, massive, golden, too close. It doesn't glow, it watches. And for a moment, she sees it not as a place, but as a presence. Not something to go to, but something that's been with her, and all of us, always. The most intimate stranger. There's a strange kind of grief that lives in our relationship with the moon. Not loud, not cinematic, but ambient. It's the grief of what could have become part of us, and didn't. The grief of momentum lost, like a letter half-written, or a touch retracted. NNSHE remembers a night as a child, tracing its shape through fogged windows, hearing her father say, "One day, you'll walk there too." And she believed it, not because he was persuasive, but because the future still felt possible then, like a place you could board, not a nostalgia loop. But she grew up. And the moon stayed where it was, unchanged, untouched, suspended in marketing slogans and documentary reruns. NNTHE, Apollo landings, 12 people. 12. Out of billions. No women, no children, no families. Just suits and countdowns and flags. It was a start, yes, but not a belonging. And maybe that's why the moon feels so distant now. Because it never truly became ours. Just borrowed. Just visited. Like a hotel room in the cosmos. NNSHE once stood in front of the original mission control room in Houston, preserved like a shrine. Ashtrays, analog screens, mustard-colored chairs. Ghosts of decisions still hanging in the circuitry. And it struck her. This is a museum of confidence. Of conviction. Of a time when we believed so deeply in forward motion that we treated risk like ritual. What changed? Not the hardware. Not the physics. Us. Our emotional bandwidth narrowed. Our timelines shrank. Our futures became personalized, not planetary. And with that shift, the moon drifted, not in space, but in relevance. It became less a destination and more a myth we stopped retelling. There's a deep irony in how much we talk about expansion. Colonizing Mars, mining asteroids, escaping Earth, while ignoring the one place we already touched. We speak of escape, but we never finished the first step. We want to go everywhere, except back. And what if going back is the key to going forward? She touches the screen of her phone. An image from Artemis 1, the Earth rising behind the moon. High-res, color-calibrated, perfect. But it doesn't move her, because it's a promise made too often without action. Beauty alone isn't enough anymore. We need meaning, not spectacle. NNTHE moon doesn't need us, but we might need it, not for resources, or territory, or survival, but for recalibration, to remember what it means to commit, to show up, to do something vast without knowing what comes after. There's a story she once read, fictional, maybe apocryphal, that the first lunar footprint will remain for 10 million years. That nothing will erase it, not wind, not rain, not time, just a perfect pressure, held in place by stillness. That's not just legacy, that's indictment. Because permanence without presence is haunting. NNSHE once lay in bed, eyes open at 3 a.m., light from the moon slicing through blinds, and thought, if someone were walking there now, I'd know. I'd feel it. Not because of the news, but because of the psychic shift. The knowing that humanity is in motion again. NNWE, underestimate the emotional physics of exploration. It's not just about science. It's about signal. We're a species wired to respond to movement, to feel less alone when someone is out there, testing the dark. And maybe that's what's missing. Not a budget, not a rocket, but a witness. Someone to go there not as a pioneer, but as a poet. Not as a hero, but as a mirror. To send back not coordinates, but questions. NNSHE imagines herself there, not in a suit, but in silence, standing in a crater. No camera crew, no ceremony, just breath, just dust, just the quiet sound of blood moving through ears. And she'd speak, not to Earth, but to the void. We're still here. We didn't forget. Because that's the thing. The moon doesn't ask for anything. It doesn't judge. But it remembers. It holds what we leave. And for 50 years, we've left nothing but delay. NNSHE once told me she doesn't dream of stars. She dreams of returning to the place where dreams paused, of walking between flags and footprints, of turning to Earth and whispering, we made it back. NNOT as victors, not as tenants, but as a species ready to stay. And maybe that's the future. Not Mars, not warp drives, not exoplanets with numbers for names, but homecoming. To the nearest exile, to the dust that once held us, to the orbit we never escaped. Emotionally, NNTHE moon isn't a challenge, it's a mirror. And we haven't liked what we see. NNBUT. Maybe it's time we looked again. Longer. softer, without expectation. Because some places don't give you meaning. They wait for you to bring it. Some nights, she doesn't look up at all. Not because the moon isn't there, but because she's afraid of what it might reflect back. Not the past, but the pause. The pause that has lasted half a century. The silence we wrapped around it like insulation. Like denial and NBUT. Tonight, she looks, really looks, and the moon seems closer. Not in distance, but in tension. As if the light between them has compressed. As if it's not waiting, but leaning. And NWE speak often about the future as escape. Mars, Dyson spheres, uploads. But the moon is not about escape. It's about return to something unfinished, something paused mid-breath. And maybe that's harder, because escape is cinematic, return is intimate. What if the reason we haven't gone back isn't fear of failure, but fear of witnessing our own inertia? Of realizing that we once stood at the edge of becoming more and stepped back. Anne S.H.E. once told me, "The moon feels like a letter I wrote to myself and never opened." That stuck with me. Because that's what it is, a message in orbit, sealed in dust and silence, waiting to be read not by rockets, but by presence. NNWE are creatures of cycles. Tides, orbits, memory. We don't move in lines, we loop. And yet, we treat progress like a forward-only algorithm, linear, accelerating, blind. The moon reminds us that forward isn't always away. Sometimes it's back. Sometimes it's deeper. Sometimes it's the second step on the same stone. Imagine this. A single woman, not a hero, not a symbol, standing alone on the lunar surface. No speech, no camera feed, just breath and dust and stars. She plants no flag, she makes no claim. She sits, lets her gloves touch the ground, feels the texture of time. And in that moment, we understand. We are not there to win. We are there to mean it. Because what if the moon was never about exploration? What if it was about reflection, not just of sunlight, but of self? NNSHE once whispered to me, half asleep, "The moon is where our story broke rhythm." And I felt it in my chest, in the data, in the drift of headlines. The rhythm hasn't been the same since. It lost a beat, a sync, a pulse. And what if restoring that rhythm doesn't start with another rocket, but with a decision to stop performing momentum and start embodying meaning? NNTO land is not enough. To build is not enough. We must inhabit the silence, inhabit the dust, inhabit the memory of what it meant to touch something without owning it, without extracting from it, without needing it to explain itself. NNSHE would go, if asked, not for glory, not for firsts, but for closure. To complete a sentence our species left hanging in 1972, not to end the story, but to make space for its next page. Because that's the paradox. The moon is both an ending and a beginning. It's a graveyard of boots and debris, but also a balcony, a place to see Earth from the outside. To realize that every border is a fiction, every nation is noise, every conflict, a footnote in the face of lunar silence. NNSHE told me the scariest part wouldn't be launch or landing. It would be the stillness. The moment after everything is done, and all you can hear is your own breath, against the backdrop of forever. And maybe that's why we avoid it. Not because it's hard, but because it's quiet. And we, as a species, are addicted to noise. NNBUT if we returned, truly returned, with stillness in our hearts and no banners in our hands. We might hear something different. NNOT, the echo of triumph. NNOT, the sound of continuation. What if the moon isn't just a place we left? What if it's the moment we stop trusting the future? What if going back isn't about engineering, but about relearning commitment? What if the first person to return doesn't need to speak at all,